Hello, beloved listeners. Thank you so much for joining us on the Alisha Doss Live Your Love show. Today we have such a treat in store. We have Dr. Shawna Shapiro with us. I have so many wonderful things to say about Dr. Shapiro. Would you like to say hello?
Hi, I'm delighted to be here.
We are delighted to have you. So, my listeners, I'll tell you all about Dr. Shapiro in just a moment. As you know, we'll start with calling in the light, really evoking that highest source within ourselves. And so let's just take a moment, if you would just place your hand on your heart, listeners, and just connect in with the heart of spirit, your higher power, by whatever name you call the divine. Just take this moment and connect now. Being aware of your humanity under your hand on your heart, your chest rising and falling. And connect now, heart to heart, with all those listening, with all those hearing the archives. Connect deeply to the heart of spirit, to the source of love itself. Knowing you are never alone, we are all one. And we just ask that anything that is less than light, less than love, any karma, negativity be taken and transmuted. Any stress, take a deep breath, let it all go. And wherever you are, just one more deep breath and let it out with some sound. As we open now into the light of the Holy Spirit, the light of love, asking only the highest good to come forward in this beautiful conversation, each one present, each one to come. We send this light out to our planet, where we might be purveyors, bringers of love, of light, of compassion in every way for the highest good, and so be it. Thank you.
Beautiful.
Thank you, Dr. Shapiro. So, my listeners, we're in for such a beautiful, loving time. Dr. Shawna Shapiro, Ph.D., is a best-selling author, clinical psychologist, internationally recognized expert in mindfulness and self-compassion. She's a professor and has published over 150 papers and 3 critically acclaimed books translated into 16 languages. Shauna has presented her research to the King of Thailand, the Danish government, Bhutan's Gross National Happiness Summit, and the World Council for Psychotherapy, as well as to Fortune 100 companies, including Google, Cisco Systems, and LinkedIn. Her work has been featured on the Wall Street Journal, Oprah, Mashable, Wired, USA Today, Dr. Oz, the Huffington Post, and the American Psychologist. Shauna is a summa cum laude graduate of Duke University and a fellow of the Mind and Life Institute, co-founded by the Dalai Lama. Her TEDx talk, The Power of Mindfulness, has been viewed over 3 million times. Well, what that very impressive bio doesn't say is that, in my experience, Shauna is really open-hearted, authentic. It's really funny. Your TED Talk has the best opening. I have to tell you, Shauna, your listeners, you have to go watch her TED Talk just for this opening. I'm not going to spoil it, but it's hysterical. Shauna, in reading your book and watching your videos, you're really a balm for the soul of our struggle to love ourselves. And to me, you really sell that really stubborn part of us on change with your beautiful science. And by the way, it's too bad this is radio, because Shauna also happens to be stunningly beautiful. We'll have to check out her Instagram too. Shauna, welcome.
Thank you. Wow, what a amazing introduction. I'm going to take you with me everywhere.
Please do. So, to me, it's funny. Somebody was asking me who you were before you're on my show, and I said, your books, your talks are really treatises on self-love. And I wanted to enter that conversation of self-love this way. Just the day before yesterday, Saturday, I attended a David White event. And when he read this poem that I want to read to you, I thought of you, Shauna, and your work on self-compassion. And I would love to hear what these poetic words wake up in you that you would share with our listeners on your experience and science of self-love. So this is from David White. Admit your distant love affair is with yourself, and that no one can play harder to get. The unwritten letters, the plays for time, the heartbreak over never being properly answered, that coy look of false seduction in the mirror, or that hard look to hide what should not be hidden, the invitation to undoing and to allowing yourself to want, and at last, to allowing yourself to want at last what you feel you never deserved, the fervent wish to come closer, and the loving word of understanding you say to yourself when you finally admit to it all, the only declaration that counts. So, Shauna, would love to hear what that awakens in you, and what is that declaration, the only declaration that counts?
Yeah, it's so beautiful. I think this idea of self-love, or as he so poetically says, a love affair with yourself, is so foreign to us, right? It's so radically different than what we're usually taught. And in fact, it feels kind of awkward or even uncomfortable to imagine being kind to ourselves. And yet when you look at the science behind it, it's the only thing that makes sense. And I think that's really why I've dedicated so much of my life to research and to scientific study, because if you try to tell people to love themselves or be kind to themselves or that this is important, they kind of roll their eyes. They don't say, oh, yes, of course. And especially when you're working with people who are really struggling. So people with addiction issues, or people struggling in their marriage or with their children, or with overweight or, smoking, and they're coming to you because they're challenged, and they say, I really want to change. And you say, well, one of the ways to do this is through really finding compassion and love for yourself. They kind of roll their eyes and they say, no, you didn't hear me. I want to change. And so one of the first things I want to share is that when we treat ourselves with judgment and shame and, hatred, really self-hatred, it actually shuts down the learning centers of the brain. And it keeps us stuck in the very behavior we're trying to change. And what's so incredible about self-kindness and self-love is that when we treat ourselves with kindness, it bathes our system in dopamine. It turns on the learning and motivation centers of the brain. Dopamine is the neuromodulator of motivation and learning. So it's this incredibly powerful neurochemical that when we treat ourselves with kindness, it bathes our system, it turns on the learning centers, and it literally gives us the motivation and the resources to make the changes in our life.
Wow. So beautiful. And so what to you is the only declaration that counts?
The declaration that counts is your true voice, right? It's finding our authentic voice, our truth. And so many of us are trying to seek out love by kind of accommodating or compromising our values, or, not really speaking our truth. And I think the invitation into self-love is also the invitation into our truth, because we know that we'll be here to catch ourselves. We don't have to, twist and conform and, kind of try to bend ourselves to make others love us.
Absolutely. I think you said that so well. And I love your science. You present it in a way that is very accessible and very understandable and at just the right point. To me, your talks are really a beautiful blend of heart and science. And one of the things that I love that you explain is neuroplasticity. And you're saying what we practice becomes stronger. Our repeated experiences shape our brain. If we want more positivity, we have to practice more positivity, so that going towards positivity is not like walking through a forest with a machete, but it becomes, I think you call it a superhighway. So I would love to hear a little bit of the science behind that and any tips you have for us to change our brain when the momentum is, taking us down the old path, which is paved, sometimes not with the best intentions.
Exactly. And all of us have them. All of us have these superhighways of habit, right? These highways that we're not proud of, that we just kind of habitually practice for so many years and decades. And so when we're trying to carve out new habit patterns, new behaviors, new ways of living, it takes practice. It's not like you flip a switch and all of a sudden you shut down the bad and turn on the good. It's layer by layer, brick by brick, experience by experience. We're laying down these new pathways and we're carving out these new superhighways in our brain. And so, neuroplasticity is an interesting one. And I want to say two things. One is I think it's the most hopeful and kind of extraordinary scientific discovery of the past 400 years. I really do. It's just amazing because what it teaches us is that change is possible no matter what throughout our entire lifespan. It's never too late. You're never too old. It's never too bad, no matter what your mistakes, no matter what, your current circumstances. It's never too late to change. So this is a very hopeful message. And neuroplasticity isn't always good. We can practice negative pathways and they get stronger. What you practice grows stronger. That is truth, but it's not necessarily always good. And so this is where one of my, I think, favorite words and most powerful practices is intention, which is we have to be intentional about what do I want to grow, right? What do I want to practice? And in every moment to ask ourselves, who do I want to be in this moment? And this is where this radical self-love comes in, because if you're in the middle of a moment where you're not acting your best self, right? So let's say, I'll give you an example. I have 4 teenagers. There are many moments in my day when I lose my mind.
Sure.
Literally lose my mind. And so I'll find myself, snapping or being impatient. Right in that moment that I catch myself, there's 2 options. The first option is the one that we typically go down, which is, oh, you're such a terrible mother. I can't believe what a hypocrite you are. Here you teach compassion and you're such a witch, right? So there's the shame, and that's our default. Yeah. I can also say, wow, sweetheart, this is not who you want to be in this moment. I know how much you love these kids, and I know how, exhausted you are. Take a breath, begin again. Who do you want to be in this moment? And so this kindness towards myself, this being on my own team, gives me the chance to begin again. Not only does it give it to me psychologically, but physiologically, as I explained before, when I'm kind to myself, it releases dopamine. It literally gives me this, boost to, pivot and change direction.
That is so gorgeous. And one of the things I love about your talks is you are so, as you just were, refreshingly, beautifully authentic. And I think it's so hard when we're, I'm a decades-long spiritual intuitive, and it's so hard when, and a teacher, and it's so hard when we think, because I've had so many of those moments, like, oh my gosh, I teach this and I'm doing that. and I think that hearing more of those stories from teachers like yourself with such a illumined bio is so incredibly important to people, because it makes positivity accessible.
Yes, absolutely. And I think that was always really hard for me in the beginning of teaching. I felt like I had to be perfect, and I felt like I kept falling short, like I wasn't, who am I to teach this when, I haven't cleaned up my whole life? And then I realized perfection isn't possible, right? The goal is actually not perfection, because perfection isn't possible. Perfection is the antithesis of evolution, right? Once you're perfect, it's over. And the name of this game is evolution. It's growth. It's evolving into your best self. And what I realized is all of my, mistakes, in quotes, but all of my vulnerabilities and challenges were everyone else's. And if I could show how I kind of began again, that it could help others.
Absolutely.
It was scary to get up and give a TED Talk that reached millions of people and talk about my divorce, right? I'm the only person in my entire family of, I have millions of cousins and, brothers and sisters and nieces and nephews and, aunties and uncles, and I'm the only person that is divorced. And in my family, it's like blasphemy, that marriage, and I do value marriage just as much as any of them, but, sometimes it doesn't work, and sometimes it's not perfect. And I think to be able to have enough self-love to say, it's not working and I need to leave and face the disappointment and the pain and the judgment of everyone else, that's where you really need to build your self-love.
Absolutely. And who knows who you gave permission to in your family and your countless listeners and readers to do the same, to leave a situation that is not working and have the courage to walk out of it with love.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
It's so important that we tell our true stories and the messy stories and the stories we don't want to tell. And those are the stories that change lives.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And I think also the recognition that our goal is not perfection, that life is not one big self-improvement project. Because otherwise, people can take even the idea of meditation or even the idea of self-love and beat themselves up for not doing it right. The goal is freedom, right? The goal is freedom from our habitual patterns, from our constant inner critic. The goal is freedom from our self-judgment, the freedom from, judging others, and really living from our good hearts. And I do believe that that's our true nature, is that there's a goodness there that sometimes gets covered over, but it's always there.
Absolutely. And my spiritual teacher, who's passed a while ago now, but used to say the only wrong way to do spiritual practice is to not do it.
I like that.
And it's so true. And I love forgive me if I don't remember it exactly, but it's something like perfection is not possible, but transformation is.
Yes.
I think that is so well said.
And that's why I developed something called the 5% principle. And the 5% principle says you don't have to do it perfectly. It's not all or none. It's not 100%. It's, can I be 5% kinder? Can I judge myself 5% less? Can I meditate 5% more? So when I teach people meditation, I say, let's start with 1 minute a day. This is not about doing an hour every morning and every night. This is just for 1 minute. Can you feel your breath? And can you stop? And how does that change things?
Would you lead us on a meditation moment?
I'd be happy to. So if you're listening and you're able to, you can close your eyes. If not, you are welcome to keep your eyes open. But just start to gather your attention inward. So feeling the breath. And see if you can stay with a full breath. So all the way from the very beginning of the inhale, feel the breath come into the body, oxygenating the body, bringing fresh life. And then all the way to the end of the exhale, releasing, letting go of carbon dioxide and stress. And then begin again. This breath in, this breath out. See if you can soften the body 5% more. And just rest, trusting that just this is good for you. When you're ready, you can slowly, gently let your eyes open if they were closed. I always like to just stretch my arms above my head and just move your body in any way that feels good. And notice if you're more present, more here. Okay.
Thank you. That was just beautiful. Shauna, as you probably know, right now the Summit of Joy is going on. Are you familiar with what I'm talking about?
Absolutely, yes.
It's just gorgeous. And yesterday I watched the documentary of the Dalai Lama and Archbishop Desmond Tutu. And they talked about Buddhist reframing, where the Dalai Lama literally got off the plane, or I'm sorry, that would be much easier, literally rode a horse for his life, of course, out of Tibet into Dharamshala, into India. And they remarked that, of course, it was, he was absolutely risking his life every moment, leaving his beloved country, knowing he'd very likely never return, would be a refugee for the rest of his life. And apparently he arrived with such a serenity that it was just rather shocking after the arduous journey. And he had decided already when he got there that being a refugee was better than being the Dalai Lama in his beloved Tibet. And he called it, I don't think it was Buddhist reframing. Might have been. I don't remember the exact term. You probably do. And to me, this is relevant to your science and your work. And I did see a gorgeous picture of you with the Dalai Lama. I would just love to hear what is inspired within you about the Dalai Lama and about reframing.
Yes, he is truly one of my inspirations, and I was lucky enough to meet him. I had received an award for my science, for my research, from a foundation that the Dalai Lama had co-founded, and so the Dalai Lama came to Santa Clara University, where I'm a professor, and he met with a number of different scientists, and I was one of them. And one of the things that most inspired me, and it really gets back to that question I asked earlier, which is, who do I want to be in this moment? And I remember him saying, when he was dealing with the Chinese, there were many times when it didn't feel fair. And, from kind of an American Western perspective, it would be like, well, why do I always have to be the good one, right? Why do I always have to be the one that does the right thing or tells the truth or is compassionate? And I remember as he was telling the story, thinking that to myself and it's saying, I bet the Dalai Lama never says, why do I always have to be the Dalai Lama? And then he said something. He said, sometimes I wake up in the morning and I think, do I want to be the Dalai Lama? And then he says, yes, I always choose that. I choose because I want to practice peace. I want to practice love. I don't want to practice hatred and, fear. And so it's almost like he makes a choice every day to keep being the Dalai Lama. And that has inspired me so many times when I'm struggling or I'm angry with someone, and just to say, who do I want to be in this moment? It doesn't really matter what they're doing. Now, I want to be clear that this doesn't mean, being compassionate doesn't mean that we don't fight. It doesn't mean that we don't stand up for, social injustices. What it means is that we do not hate. And that distinction has been very helpful for me.
Wow, that's so inspiring, and I love it when we go back to authenticity of putting flesh and blood on these, masters of that, making them inaccessible and a god means that we don't have the onus on ourselves to make that hard choice each moment. They are very human and make that choice.
Exactly.
How do you do that? If you could just kind of, I'm asking you to open the curtain back even just a little more. And what are some tips, or do you have a story about when it was really hard to make that positive choice, and yet you were able to walk yourself around to the front of your brain and make that choice towards love and kindness?
Yes, I'll tell you a story I haven't told in a long time, but I've been thinking about it a lot lately. So when my son was about 9 years old, I was invited to go to Europe to teach. And so he stayed home with his father and his grandparents, but I was away for 2 weeks. And it was the longest we had ever been apart. We really had never been apart before. And as I was flying home from Copenhagen, I remember feeling really anxious, like, oh, my God, I did the wrong thing. I shouldn't have left my son for this long. I've ruined our attachment bond. I'm a terrible mother. And I started spiraling into this guilt and shame that only parents can know. I would never feel like we're doing it right.
Oh, yeah.
And instead of indulging in that for the next 14 hours on the flight, I set a clear intention. I set the intention that when I get home, I'm not going to unpack. I'm not going to check mail or email. I'm going to spend those first 24 hours reconnecting, bonding with my son. So I got home. We live in California. It was a beautiful, sunny day. And my son and I have always loved going to the beach together. So I said, hey, Jackson, you want to go to the beach? And he was like, sure. So I start packing up all his favorite, beach gear and his favorite food for a picnic. And I'm out at the car and I'm waving to the neighbors like, see, I'm home. See what a good mom I am? It's not going to end well. So I go back in and I say, okay, Jackson, let's go. And he goes, nah, I don't feel like it anymore. And I said, what? You're going to go to the beach and I'm going to show you how much I love you, damn it. So he gets on his swimsuit and we walk out the door and I kind of head right for the car and I'm a little bit in agenda mode. When you're on your schedule and you want to get to the beach and the time for the perfect sunlight and the perfect picnic. And, I kind of lost track of my intention. And Jackson, on the other hand, was just sitting on our front porch with no agenda. And so I yelled to him from the car. I'm like, hey, Jackson, let's go. And he doesn't even look up. And I start getting frustrated and impatient. And I'm about to yell again when all of a sudden I remember my intention from the airplane. The most important thing. All I want to do is reconnect with my son to let him know I love him and I'm home and he's safe. I don't care if we go to the beach or when we get there. So I get out of the car and I go and sit down next to him and we're sitting on our front porch and he's watching these ants. And I sit down and I start watching the ants. And they're actually pretty incredible, right? So I'm sitting there watching these ants. And all of a sudden, I feel his little body begin to soften. And he leans his shoulder into my shoulder, and I feel the sun on our backs. And that was it. That was the most important thing. And I almost missed it. So that shows you the power of intention, how we can kind of get on automatic pilot, we can get lost in kind of what we think is important in that moment, and we forget our true values, our true priorities.
That is just so beautiful. I love that story. And intention really is so incredibly powerful. Do you have any just little tips? It can sound like such kind of a scary word sometimes. I've heard listeners say, do you have any tips to make that very doable, pragmatic, easy?
Yes. Well, one of the most important ways is to each morning set an intention, to take a moment. In fact, in my new Good Morning, I Love You journal, that's how I begin, is with intention practice, because I think it's the most important place to start.
I find that my life tends to somewhat track my shows. I know that sounds odd, but again, a few nights ago, knowing that we were doing this interview today, Shauna, I had an experience, and this is where I'm going to draw back the curtain and be really self-revealing. But the experience made me want to ask you about your experience with spirituality and self-compassion, self-loving. So a few nights ago, I was laying in bed, and it was I've had a health challenge. I had surgery not too long ago, and I was lying in bed, and I started having this spiritual experience that my mind, we talked about our, neuroplasticity is not always a good thing if our ego is running the show, is trying to pave the highway. And I went into a sense of panic. And the panic was, if I am to go into the absolute spirit, then myself, my individuation, will have to be annihilated. And that was what the panic was coming from. And I connected to spirit. What you probably don't know about me, Shauna, is I'm a decades-long spiritual intuitive, and I was connecting to spirit, and there is that, very much that prevailing thinking that if we're really going to go into the allness, of course we have to sacrifice individuation, which is true, but I had a different quality of experience this time where I went into this infinity, and from that place of altitude, I looked back at my body, at myself, with such tenderness, with a lack of identification, called that's not me, because me is everywhere, and nowhere, but with such an appreciation for meeting a friend on a journey. And I looked at, the surgery was on my abdomen, and looked at the scars on my abdomen, and of course that's, was where I'd given birth, and just looked at my body with such tenderness and love, and such looking at the frailty of it, the fallibility of it, the mortality of it, but with such tenderness, and not a feeling of, I have to disappear. This is illusion. We are all the allness of spirit, and yet there was such a deep sense of self-loving. And so I would just love to hear if anything that calls forward in you to share about spirituality and self-loving.
That's so beautiful, and it really, it's a moment of grace, right? When we're able to feel that unconditional love for ourselves, and even that sense that spirit is holding us in unconditional love. And so first of all, I'm so happy that was your experience, and I think that's what all of us are yearning for, right? That we are yearning for that type of grace. And I think, you can't force something like that to happen. In fact, in Zen Buddhism, they have a great saying that says that this kind of grace or enlightenment or unconditional love is kind of like random. You can't force it to happen. It's kind of accidental. And they say that meditation practice makes you accident prone. It makes you more likely to have that kind of grace. And I love that, because for me, that's kind of how it's been, is that this path of self-love has been a long journey. It has been a very long path or road, and it was a practice. And that the kind of moment of grace where I felt that love, and I felt my mother and my grandmother and God's love, didn't happen overnight. But I practiced earnestly and with dedication every single day. And so I think, it has to do with faith, that you're willing to keep going. And that's really where the science and spirit for me merge together, right? And sometimes I find that I take my solace and my nourishment from Source, and my faith that there is something larger than myself. And sometimes I take it in the science, where I'm like, ooh, neuroplasticity really exists, and my brain really can change. And what I know is that it's the truth is about, one step at a time. And that's really the practice.
That's a beautiful answer. Thank you. Shauna, what is the one thing you most want listeners to know?
I love this question. It's really two things, actually. One is that you're not alone. I think so many of us feel like we are the only ones that feel lost or lonely or depressed or are struggling with money or purpose or, confused about what's the next step. And I just, having worked with so many thousands of people, I can say wholeheartedly, as a clinical psychologist and scientist and professor, that you're not alone, that we all of us, it's the human condition, and that healing and change and transformation are possible. And for me, one of the most powerful ways to do this is through self-love and offering that love out into the world, so that my practice is never just for myself, that everything I do, I know, has ripples out into this world. And when I'm sending myself love, so for example, in a moment of pain, we'll use your example. So if I've had, as you said, a surgery in my abdomen, in my stomach, and I'm feeling the pain of it, and I send myself love and compassion, sweetheart, it's hard, and I'm proud of you, this body who's given birth. And then I think of all the other people who have had surgery and are in pain and struggling with their body, and I send my compassion out to them. So I'm sending it both to myself and to everyone else. And in that moment, I realize I'm not alone, because I'm not the only one that just had surgery, right? There's hundreds of thousands of other people. And so in that same moment that I'm comforting them, I'm also being comforted, because I'm recognizing that I'm not alone.
Wow, I got chills. That was just gorgeous. And now we're going to do just a few minutes of meditation. As you know, listeners of my show, we take just a few minutes to see if we can experience what Dr. Shapiro has so generously and tenderly shared with us. So let's just take a few minutes, and again, let's just place a hand on our heart, and if you can, a hand on your belly, and just feel your humanity, sending the light to your beautiful inner child basic self that resides in that second and third chakra, sending the light through the spiritual heart, and just taking in a breath. And as Shauna said, just following that breath, taking in a deep breath. And inhale loving, and as you exhale, just let that breath be given back into the universe freely, bringing you present. One more time, inhale loving, self-loving, and as you exhale, that love just amplifies. And allow yourself to set an intention, just these few moments, to really have a love affair with yourself. To just take a deep breath, and with this next breath, let go of any resistance, embarrassment to self-love. Just let it all go. And we come into a faith, not only of Source now, but a faith in the science that she shared with us, that we really can rewire our brain to self-love, to positivity, to productivity. So just now sacrifice anything that's gone before. Sacrifice identifying with what you've done, with what you haven't done, with your body, with your emotions. Just let it all go with this next breath. And open to bathing your brain with dopamine, with loving kindness. And perhaps now just see in front of you an image of someone you love so much. It could be a child, pet, God. And just feel your loving for that being. And place your hand on their heart. Go ahead and put your hand in front of you and place your hand on their heart. Just feel the love coming from your hand to them. Now turn and place your hand on your own heart, flooding yourself with self-loving, and perhaps you say, as Shauna says, good morning, I love you. And really open to receive your own loving. And ask yourself in this moment, who do I want to be in this moment? And allow yourself to hear that answer. Who do I want to be in this moment? And what do I want to grow? What do I want to practice? What's my intention? Just for this moment, what's my intention? Open yourself to receive that. Breathe that intention in. And as you exhale, that intention amplifies and sends into the universe a prayer that you would live and breathe that intention, especially when it's hard, especially when it's the last thing from your mind, that you would come back into the moment to live that intention, as even the Dalai Lama has to choose You choose back in this moment to evolve into your best self, to place yourself in a place to receive grace. Know that as you do, your grace that you've extended to yourself, that you've placed yourself to receive from Spirit, extends out into the world and blesses all as you bless yourself. Deep breath, breathe on all the goodness. Exhale, let that goodness go out into the world, and gently bring yourself back into the moment. Amen.
Amen.
So, Shauna, would you share with us anything you'd like to leave our audience with?
I'm very grateful to have had the opportunity to be led by you through that meditation. It was really exquisite to hear these teachings reflected back to me, so thank you. And I want to encourage everyone to begin. Rumi beautifully says, wherever you are is the entry point. Right? Sometimes people wait for the perfect moment to begin, but this is the perfect moment right here and right now. So I would encourage you to get the book, get the journal, listen to a free meditation, watch a free TED Talk. Just choose one small thing that you can do that will move you forward in the direction of greater self-love. So thank you so much for inviting me. I've really enjoyed this conversation.
It's been a true joy and delight to have you. And listeners, you'll find so much beauty at DrShawnashapiro.com. DrShaunashapiro.com. So much goodness there. And you'll have to listen to her TED Talk.
Thank you so much. It's been a joy.